In 1805, a fire burned the entire city of Detroit to the ground. Out of roughly 300 buildings, only one survived. Standing in the ashes, a local priest gave the city a new motto, two Latin phrases that are still on Detroit's flag and official seal today. Speramus meliora, resurgit cineribus. We hope for better things, it shall rise from the ashes. He had no idea how many times that motto would be needed. Because this is the city that put the world on wheels, built the weapons that won a world war, and invented a sound the whole planet dances to, and then fell harder than any American city has ever fallen, all the way to the largest city bankruptcy in US history.
And then it started rising. Again, this is how Detroit was built. Detroit is older than the United States itself, by 75 years.
In 1701, a French officer with a magnificent name, Antoine de la Motte Cadillac, sailed down the narrow river connecting Lake Huron to Lake Erie and planted a fort on its bank. The French called the river Le Détroit, simply the Strait. The fort became Fort Detroit, and the name stuck to everything that grew around it. Remember Cadillac's name, by the way. 2 centuries later, a Detroit car company would borrow it, which is why one of the world's most famous luxury brands is named after a French colonial officer. For a century, Detroit was a fur trading outpost that changed flags like jerseys, French, then British, and only in 1796, 13 years after American independence, did the American flag finally rise over it. Then came the fire of 1805, the motto, and a bold new street plan of grand avenues radiating from the center, modeled on Washington, D.C. You can still see it in the map of downtown today, and in the decades before the Civil War, Detroit's location gave it a secret, heroic role. Look at the map. Right across that narrow river is Canada, where slavery was outlawed. Detroit became one of the most important final stations on the Underground Railroad. Its code name on the network was Midnight. For thousands of people escaping slavery, the lights across the Detroit River were literally the lights of freedom.
Here's a question worth asking. Of all the cities in America, why did the automobile industry explode in this one?
Because by 1900, Detroit had quietly assembled all the ingredients. It was already a major manufacturing city, one of the world's leading producers of stoves, railroad cars, ship's engines, and carriages. That meant thousands of machinists, foundries, and engine experts. The Great Lakes delivered iron and copper almost to the factory door. And the city's wealthy lumber and mining barons had piles of capital looking for the next big thing. Into this environment stepped a farmer's son and self-taught engineer named Henry Ford. He wasn't first. Dozens of Detroit tinkerers were building horseless carriages, and companies like Oldsmobile were already selling them. Ford's obsession was different, not to build a car for the rich, but a car for everyone. In 1908, he launched the Model T, simple, tough, and affordable. Then, in 1913, at his Highland Park plant, Ford's team perfected the idea that changed human civilization, the moving assembly line. Instead of workers moving around a car, the car moved past the workers, each performing one task. The time to build a Model T collapsed from over 12 hours to about 90 minutes. Prices fell year after year until a car cost a few months of an ordinary wage. And in 1914, Ford dropped a second bombshell, the $5 day, roughly double the going factory wage. Workers besieged the gates. Critics called him insane. Ford understood he was creating his own customers. Assembly line workers could now afford the very cars they built.
The results were staggering. Detroit became the fastest growing big city in America, from under 300,000 people in 1900 to over 1.5 million by 1930.
General Motors and Chrysler rose alongside Ford, forming the Big Three, and Detroit became to cars what Hollywood was to film. Not a city with an industry, but a city that was an industry. The factory gates pulled in the whole world. Immigrants poured in from Poland, Italy, Greece, Mexico, the Middle East. Detroit still has one of the largest Arab American communities in the country. And in the Great Migration, hundreds of thousands of Black Americans came north from the segregated South, chasing Ford's wages and a measure of dignity. But the Magnet City had a dark wiring underneath. Black workers were largely confined to the hardest, dirtiest jobs, and, crucially, to overcrowded neighborhoods, walled in by discriminatory housing rules. In 1941, one developer literally built a 2-meter concrete wall to separate a black neighborhood from a planned white one. It's still standing. Detroit was building prosperity and segregation on the same assembly line, and the bill would come due. First, though, the city had a world to save.
When World War II came, President Roosevelt called on America to become the arsenal of democracy. In practice, that arsenal had an address: Detroit.
The government banned civilian car production, and the Big Three converted everything. Chrysler built tanks by the tens of thousands. GM built guns, trucks, and aircraft engines. And Ford built something almost unbelievable: the Willow Run plant, at the time among the largest factories on Earth, where the chaos of bomber construction was reorganized like a Model T line. By 1944, Willow Run was producing a complete B-24 heavy bomber, 1.2 million parts, roughly every hour. Soviet, British, and American forces all rode to victory on Detroit-built machines. 500,000 new workers flooded the city, including, for the first time, huge numbers of women on the lines, the real-life Rosie the Riveters. Detroit came out of the war rich, proud, and seemingly unstoppable. In the 1950s, it was among the wealthiest big cities in America, the middle-class dream on 4 wheels, and it had one more gift for the world. In 1959, a former boxer and Ford assembly line worker named Barry Gordy borrowed $800 from his family and founded a record label in a small Detroit house. He applied the assembly line idea to music, songwriting, recording, choreography, artist development, every step systematized. He called the label Motown from Motortown. Stevie Wonder, the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, the Jackson 5. A tiny house in Detroit became the most successful black-owned business in America and changed the sound of the planet.
So what went wrong? Almost everything, and mostly at the same time.
The seeds were planted in the good years. New highways, ironically, built for Detroit's own cars, let white families move to the suburbs, taking their taxes with them, while discrimination trapped black families in the old city. The factories themselves began moving out too, to cheaper land and cheaper labor. Then, in July 1967, the pressure exploded. A police raid on an after-hours club in a black neighborhood ignited 5 days of uprising, among the deadliest civil disturbances in American history. 43 dead, thousands arrested, whole blocks burned, federal troops and tanks in the streets of an American city. The causes ran deep: decades of police abuse, housing walls, and shut doors. Afterward, the flight out of the city became a stampede. The 1970s piled on. Oil crises made Detroit's big cars look like dinosaurs, and Japanese automakers ate the Big Three's market share year after year. Plants closed, population collapsed, from 1.85 million in 1950 toward just 680,000 by 2013. Whole neighborhoods emptied, The city ended up with tens of thousands of abandoned buildings, and the world's photographers came to shoot the ruins of Detroit, a great American city looking like a fallen civilization. In July 2013, the end officially arrived. Detroit filed for bankruptcy, $18 billion in debt, the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history. The city that put the world on wheels was broke.
But remember the motto, it shall rise from the ashes.
The bankruptcy, painful as it was, cleared the books, and in a famous grand bargain, foundations and the state put up hundreds of millions to protect pensions and save the Detroit Institute of Art's masterpieces from being sold off. The streetlights came back on. Emergency response times fell from nearly an hour toward normal. Downtown, billions in investment, much of it from Detroit-born businessman Dan Gilbert, who moved his companies and thousands of jobs into the core, restored the great towers of the 1920s. The magnificent Michigan Central Station, for decades the world's most photographed ruin and the symbol of Detroit's death, was bought by Ford and reopened in 2024 as a technology campus. Read that again. Ford, the company that built the city, rebuilt its most famous ruin. Today, Detroit is far from healed. Vast neighborhoods still struggle, and the comeback is uneven. But in 2023, the city recorded something it hadn't seen since the 1950s. Its population grew. The Motor City is betting its future on electric vehicles, on its startups, on its arts. Detroit techno, born here in the 1980s, conquered the world's dance floors just as Motown once did. And on the stubbornness of the people who never left. Two fires, 2 centuries apart. The same motto, still true. Detroit gave the modern world more than perhaps any city its size. The assembly line, the affordable car, the 8-hour industrial middle class, the arsenal that won a world war, and the soundtracks of 2 generations. Then it paid a price no American city had ever paid, and refused to stay down. We hope for better things. It shall rise from the ashes. Not a bad motto, not a bad city.
So here's my question for you. What's the greatest comeback story you've ever witnessed? A city, a company, or a person? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, check out my video on how Chicago was built, Detroit's great rival, and another city that literally rose from its own fire. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.